What would you do if your small town hid a deadly secret? Tonight, we're diving into 10 disturbing true stories from the Pacific Northwest, places where isolation turns neighbors into threats and silence protects the guilty. These are genuine experiences shared by real people, names and certain details changed to ensure their protection. From Washington's logging roads to Montana's search parties, these aren't legends, they happened. Drop your location and local time in the comments. If these stories terrify you, subscribe to Unspoken Fears for more nightmare fuel. Let's begin. My name is Nancy, and I'm a 28-year-old environmental surveyor. I was hired by a state contractor to spend 2 weeks in concrete assessing old logging roads for a reforestation project. I'd never been to this part of Washington before, just knew it was a small town near the North Cascades, population under 1,000, tucked away in the mountains where the timber industry had died decades ago. I checked into a run-down motel on the edge of town, the kind with thin walls and a flickering neon sign that buzzed all night long. Every morning, I'd grab coffee at the same diner where the locals would nod politely but never really talk to me. Their eyes would linger just a second too long before they'd turn back to their plates. My work was straightforward. Hike abandoned logging roads with GPS equipment, take soil samples, document erosion patterns for the state's environmental assessment. The roads were gated off, supposedly untouched for years, chained and locked to prevent access. It was solitary work, but I liked the quiet. Just me, the dense forest, and the sound of my boots crunching on gravel overgrown with moss. The first 3 days went exactly as planned. I'd wake up at dawn, fuel up on terrible diner coffee and stale pastries, then drive my truck to the trailheads marked on my survey map. The logging roads were exactly what I expected. Crumbling asphalt reclaimed by ferns and saplings, rusted equipment abandoned in the undergrowth, evidence of an industry that had moved on and left this town behind. I took my measurements, documented everything in my field notebook, sent my daily reports back to the contractor in Seattle. It was boring work, repetitive, but that's what I signed up for. On day 4, everything changed. I was working on Road 47, one of the more remote access routes that cut deep into the Cascade foothills. The gate at the entrance was exactly like all the others. Heavy chain, padlock, weathered warning signs about trespassing. But when I got closer to inspect the lock, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The chain had been cut, then rewelded. Professionally, someone had gone to the trouble of making it look undisturbed from a distance, but up close, the fresh metal was obvious, still slightly discolored from the torch. I should have turned around right then, filed a note in my report about possible unauthorized access, and moved on to the next site. But curiosity got the better of me. I was young, ambitious, wanted to be thorough, so I lifted the chain. It wasn't actually locked, just looped to look secure, and I drove my truck through. The road went on for maybe 2 miles before I found them. Fresh tire tracks, deep treads pressed into the soft dirt, recent enough that the edges hadn't crumbled yet. Rain from 2 nights ago would have washed them away, so this was within the last 48 hours. I followed them on foot, my GPS unit tracking my position as I moved deeper into the forest. The tracks led to a clearing about a 1/4 mile off the main logging road, hidden behind a thick wall of Douglas firs. What I saw there made my breath catch. Blue tarps stretched between trees, covering something. Disturbed ground everywhere, rectangular patches where the soil had been dug up and poorly refilled, cigarette butts scattered around a makeshift fire pit, crushed energy drink cans, fresh boot prints in the mud, at least 3 different tread patterns. This wasn't some kids camping illegally. This was coordinated, organized, deliberate. I took photos, lots of them, documented everything in my notebook, GPS coordinates, measurements, close-ups of the boot prints and tire tracks. Then I got out of there. My hands were shaking as I drove back through the gate, rewrapped the chain the way I'd found it, and headed straight back to concrete. That evening, I made my first mistake. I was eating dinner at the motel, just a microwaved burrito from the gas station, when the owner, an older man named Gil, knocked on my door to ask if I needed fresh towels. I mentioned casually that I'd found some unusual activity on Road 47, asked if he knew anything about people using the old logging roads. His face changed completely. The friendly, small-town hospitality vanished, replaced by something cold and distant. He told me, very directly, that Road 47 was private property and I needed to stay away from restricted areas. I tried to explain that my contract gave me access to all state-surveyed routes, but he cut me off, told me I didn't understand how things worked around here. Then he left without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 11 p.m., I heard an engine idling in the parking lot. I pulled back the curtain just enough to see a dark pickup truck, headlights off, parked 3 spaces down from my room. It sat there for over an hour, just idling. Nobody got out, nobody approached, but the message was clear. They were watching me. They knew which room I was in. They wanted me to know they knew. The next morning, 3 different people warned me. First, it was Linda, the waitress at the diner. She refilled my coffee and mentioned, almost too casually, that people sometimes get lost in the wrong areas around here, and search parties don't always find them. Then it was the attendant at the gas station, a younger guy who wouldn't make eye contact. He told me the mountain roads could be dangerous this time of year, lots of ways to have an accident. Finally, Gil showed up again while I was loading my survey equipment into my truck. He said the town appreciated that I was just doing my job, but some areas were better left alone. For my own safety, I realized then that the entire town knew whatever was happening on Road 47. It wasn't a secret. It was protected. And my questions had marked me as a problem. I should have left right then, packed my things, driven back to Seattle, filed an incomplete report, and walked away from the contract. But I didn't. I was angry. I'd been threatened, intimidated, and I wanted to know what they were hiding. So I made my second mistake. I went back. This time I was careful. I parked my truck 2 miles away on a different access road, hiked in on foot through the dense forest. Staying off the main trail, it took me 3 hours to reach the area near Road 47. But I found what I was looking for, a second clearing, bigger than the first, with the same signs of recent activity. More tarps, more disturbed earth, and this time I saw something that made everything click into place. Chemical drums, unmarked, stacked near the tree line, the kind used for industrial waste, dozens of them, some partially buried, some just abandoned in the open. But what I didn't know then was that I wasn't the first surveyor they'd had to deal with, and the last one never filed her final report. I took more photos, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was documenting everything when I heard voices, men's voices, coming from the main road. They were close, maybe 100 yards away. I didn't wait to see who they were. I ran, crashed through the underbrush, didn't care about the noise, just needed to get away. I made it back to my truck and drove straight to the motel, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. When I got back to my room, I knew immediately that someone had been inside. My survey equipment was exactly where I'd left it, but the GPS unit had been wiped. All my stored coordinates deleted. The memory card from my camera gone. They hadn't stolen anything else. Not my laptop, not my wallet, just the evidence. The message was clear. They could get to me whenever they wanted. The next morning, a man approached me at the diner. Older, probably in his 60s, wearing a Carhartt jacket and a friendly smile. He introduced himself as Dutch, said he'd heard I was doing survey work in the area, offered to personally guide me to some better locations, safer routes with easier access and better data. He was trying to redirect me, keep me away from whatever they were protecting. I thanked him, told him I had my assigned routes already, watched his smile fade just a little. That afternoon, I was back at the diner, sitting in a corner booth, pretending to read my field notes, but actually listening. 2 men were sitting 3 tables away, talking in low voices. But the diner was small, and the acoustics were bad. For private conversations, I heard one of them say something about keeping things quiet until the contract's done. The other mentioned Seattle people asking questions. Then they both went silent when they noticed me watching. They paid and left without finishing their coffee. On what was supposed to be my final day in concrete, I woke up at 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. When I came back to bed, I noticed something on the floor near the door. A piece of paper, folded once, slipped under the gap while I was asleep. I picked it up with trembling hands and unfolded it. The message was handwritten, block letters, neat and deliberate. It said, "Finish your report and leave town." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall watching the door, listening to every sound, every car that passed on the highway, every footstep in the hallway. At dawn, I started packing. I spent that entire day writing the most deliberately vague, sanitized report of my career. I documented the erosion patterns, the vegetation reclamation, the soil samples from the approved sites. I made no mention of Road 47, no mention of the clearings, the chemical drums, the re-welded gates, nothing that would draw attention or trigger follow-up investigations. I filed it electronically at 4 p.m., then loaded everything into my truck and checked out of the motel 2 days early. Gil was at the front desk when I returned my key. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once, almost approvingly. He said safe travels, and I believed he meant it. I'd done what they wanted. I was leaving. The problem was solved. I drove straight through to Seattle, 6 hours without stopping. Didn't relax until I was back in my apartment with the door locked and the lights on. I told myself I'd done the right thing, that I'd had no proof, no backup, no one to trust. The local police were probably involved, or at least complicit. What was I supposed to do? 6 months later, I saw a news story. Just a brief mention on a Seattle news website. Illegal toxic dumping discovered in Skagit County. State and federal investigators looking into possible environmental crimes dating back years. The article didn't mention concrete specifically, didn't give exact locations, just vague references to remote logging areas. No arrests were made, no companies were named. The story disappeared after 2 days. I still don't know if I was in actual physical danger, if they would have hurt me if I'd pushed harder, asked more questions, or if the intimidation was just enough to ensure my silence. I don't know what they were dumping, who was paying them, how long it had been going on. I think about the last surveyor, the one who never filed her final report. I've tried to find information about her, searched contractor records, asked around the industry, but there's nothing. Maybe she just quit, moved on to another job, or maybe something worse happened, and nobody ever connected it to concrete. I turned down every surveying contract in isolated small towns. After that, I work exclusively in suburban and urban areas now, places with witnesses, cell phone coverage, police departments that aren't part of the local power structure. I tell people it's because I prefer the convenience, the better pay. But that's not the whole truth. The truth is that I'm afraid of stumbling onto something I'm not supposed to see. Afraid of towns where everyone knows everyone, and secrets are protected by silence. Afraid of flickering neon signs and dark pickup trucks idling in parking lots at midnight. Afraid of handwritten notes slipped under doors at 3 a.m. I still have the note. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe as evidence, maybe as a reminder. It's in a folder in my desk drawer, along with the few photos I managed to upload to cloud storage before they wiped my equipment. I've never shown them to anyone, never filed a supplemental report, never contacted the investigators who were looking into the Skagit County dumping. Sometimes I wonder if I should, if I have a moral obligation to speak up, to provide what little evidence I have. But then I remember the way Gil looked at me, the way the entire town seemed to move in coordination, the way they made it clear that my safety depended on my silence, and I stay quiet. Concrete is still there, still a small town near the North Cascades, population under 1,000, still surrounded by abandoned logging roads and dense forest. And somewhere out there, on Road 47, there are clearings that I documented, chemical drums that I photographed, secrets that an entire community decided were worth protecting. I don't know what happened to the last surveyor, but I know what happened to me. I survived because I understood the message, because I did what they wanted, because I left, and I'm never going back. My name is Liam. I'm 35, and I'm a remote software developer. I decided to rent a house in Joseph for 3 months during winter 2024 to escape Portland, focus on a major coding project, and experience small-town mountain life. Joseph seemed perfect. Population 1,000. Right near the Wallowa Mountains, cheap rent. I found the rental through an online property management company. A small 2-bedroom house on the quiet edge of town with reliable internet and mountain views. The owner supposedly lived out of state in California. Everything seemed ideal for my work-focused winter. Quiet, no distractions, beautiful scenery. I settled into a routine. Work all day. Grocery runs twice a week. Evening walks around town. Occasional drives to nearby trails. But within 3 weeks, I'd realize I wasn't the only one living in that house. I moved in on a cold Monday in early December. The house was exactly as advertised, clean, furnished with mismatched but functional furniture. I settled into my routine quickly. Work from 8 a.m. until sometimes midnight. The kind of deep focus work that required isolation. Joseph in winter was stunning. The Wallowa Mountains rising up behind the town like something out of a postcard. Everything covered in snow, the streets nearly empty most days. The first 3 weeks passed without incident. I was making excellent progress on my project. A complex database architecture for a healthcare client in Seattle. The house was perfect for it, warm, quiet. Nothing but the occasional wind rattling the windows. Then small things started happening. I'd come back from a walk, and my coffee mug would be on a different counter. Not where I'd left it, or a window I was certain I'd closed would be open just a crack. My laptop's angle would be slightly different. At first, I assumed I was misremembering. I was working long hours, sleep-deprived, surviving on coffee and takeout. My brain was fried. But then one morning, everything changed. I woke up around 7 a.m. and found muddy boot prints on the kitchen floor, clear as day, leading from the back door to the hallway. The prints were large, men's boots, at least size 11 or 12. I wear size 9. The mud was still slightly damp. Recent. I checked every door, every window. Everything was locked, secure. The back door was deadbolted from the inside. There was no way someone could have locked it from the outside after leaving. I searched the entire house. Nothing. Nobody. Just me and those boot prints drying on my kitchen floor. I called the property management company, explained what I'd found. They called back 3 hours later. A woman with a disinterested voice told me they'd look into it. Mentioned that the previous tenant had made some complaints about the locks, but nothing was ever confirmed. That's when I decided to set up surveillance. I used my phone, positioned it to capture the main areas, kitchen, hallway, back door, set it to record, then left for a grocery run. Gone for maybe 45 minutes. When I came back and checked the footage, my stomach dropped. The video showed nothing, absolutely nothing. Just an empty house, no movement. But when I walked through the house, there was clear evidence someone had been inside. Fresh coffee grounds in the sink. I hadn't made coffee before leaving. My shower was damp, water still clinging to the tiles. My desk chair was moved. Someone had been in my house, had made coffee, had taken a shower, had sat at my desk, and somehow the camera had captured nothing. I started losing sleep. I'd lie in bed at night listening to every sound. The house settling, wind against the siding, branches scraping the roof. Every creak in the floorboards made me think someone was moving through the house. I kept a knife from the kitchen on my nightstand. Then I found the door. I'd been searching the basement, looking for any possible entry point I'd missed. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed beams, old shelves stacked with paint cans and forgotten tools. I was moving boxes when I noticed the shelves along the back wall weren't flush. There was a gap. I pulled the shelves forward. They moved easily, too easily, and behind them was a door. Small, painted the same color as the concrete wall, easy to miss. It wasn't locked. I opened it and found a crawl space extending back under the house. Inside was a sleeping bag, relatively new, still rolled out like someone had been using it. Food wrappers scattered around, granola bar wrappers, empty water bottles, and a notebook, spiral-bound, filled with handwriting. I opened the notebook with shaking hands. It was a log, dates and times. My schedule, documented in careful detail. Leaves house 10:30 a.m., Tuesdays and Fridays. Grocery store, returns by noon. Works at desk until 11 p.m. most nights, goes to bed by midnight. Someone had been watching me, tracking my movements, living in my house. I got out of that basement, locked myself in my bedroom, and called the property management company again, demanded answers. The woman on the phone was dismissive, told me I was overreacting. I told her about the crawl space, the notebook, the evidence someone had been living there. She went quiet for a long moment, then said she'd send someone to check it out. Nobody ever came. I bought wireless cameras online, had them shipped overnight, positioned them throughout the house, set them to upload footage to cloud storage, checked the app obsessively. 2 days later, I reviewed the footage and found something that made my blood run cold. Sections of the footage were missing, deleted, gaps where hours had been removed. Someone had accessed my camera system remotely. Someone knew I was watching. Then a neighbor spoke to me. An older woman who lived 3 houses down. She approached me one evening while I was getting mail, asked how I was settling in. Her tone was strange, loaded with something I couldn't identify. I told her everything was fine. She looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "The owner's son used to live here, before the family sold it. I think everyone around here knows he still has keys." The owner's son, nobody had mentioned him. Not the property listing, not the management company. I went home and started researching. Searched county court records. Took me 3 hours, but I found it. An arrest record from 2 years earlier. The owner's son, charged with stalking and criminal trespassing. Case dismissed on a technicality. I realized then that I wasn't safe. That he'd been coming into the house regularly, watching me, studying my habits. I started noticing things missing, not valuables, but personal things. A framed photo of my girlfriend from my nightstand. Gone. A t-shirt from the laundry basket vanished. My toothbrush replaced with an identical one. A book from my bedside table disappeared. Someone was taking pieces of my life, slowly, deliberately. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. I woke up at 2 a.m. to complete silence, but I was certain, absolutely certain, that someone was in the house. I could feel it, that primal instinct that tells you you're not alone. Then I heard it, the softest sound, a floorboard creaking in the hallway outside my bedroom. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and barricaded my bedroom door with my dresser, desk chair, everything I could move. I shoved furniture against the door until it wouldn't budge. Then I sat on my bed with the knife in my hand and waited. I called 911, whispered that someone was in my house. The dispatcher kept me talking for 20 minutes until a deputy arrived. When I finally opened the door, there was nobody in the hallway, nobody in the house. The deputy searched everywhere, found nothing. He looked at me like I was wasting his time, asked if I'd been drinking. After he left, I packed everything into my car, didn't wait until morning. Loaded up at 3 a.m., drove straight back to Portland, 6 hours without stopping. Left the keys in the mailbox with a note that I was breaking the lease. The property management company sent threatening emails about breach of contract, demanding I pay the remaining rent, threatening legal action. I responded with everything I'd found, the arrest records, the neighbors' comments, the evidence of stalking. I told them I'd go to the police, to the media. They never responded, never followed through, which told me everything. I later discovered the house had been rented 6 times in 3 years. Every tenant broke their lease early. None stayed longer than 2 months. There were complaints filed with the county, reports to local police, but nothing ever resulted in charges. I still don't know how he was getting in, whether there were other hidden access points I never found. I don't know if he was in the house every time I left. I don't know what he did with the things he stole from me. I moved back in with my girlfriend in Portland. Had to explain why I'd abandoned the rental. Why I came home in the middle of the night. I obsessively check locks now. Every door, every window, multiple times before bed. I can't stay in hotels without inspecting every inch of the room first. I refuse to rent any property without meeting the owner in person. I still think about those nights in Joseph, lying in bed, knowing someone was watching. Someone was documenting my life. Someone was moving through my space. I think about the notebook with my schedule written in careful handwriting. The sleeping bag in the crawlspace. The missing photo. I wonder if he's doing it to someone else now. If there's another tenant in that house experiencing the same things, finding their belongings moved, their privacy violated. I reported everything to local police before I left, filed a formal complaint, gave them the arrest records. They took a report, told me they'd investigate. I never heard back. The house is still listed for rent online. Same photos, same description, no mention of the history. New tenants probably moving in right now, thinking they've found the perfect remote work setup. They have no idea what they're walking into. No idea that someone has keys, that someone will be watching. I'm safe now, back in Portland. Doors locked, security system installed. But I still wake up sometimes at 2 a.m., convinced someone is in the house. I still check the locks multiple times. Still can't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone is watching, waiting, documenting my schedule in a notebook. And I know that the next tenant in the Joseph rental isn't as lucky as I was. They're living in that house right now, wondering why their coffee mug moved, why the window's open, why they feel like they're being watched. They just don't know yet that they're right. My name is Iceland. I'm 26, and I'm a traveling nurse. I took a 3-month contract at Wallace's small rural hospital starting in September. The pay was significantly higher than typical contracts, which should have been my first warning. But Wallace seemed charming, historic, and the hospital staff was welcoming. During my interview, I was assigned to night shifts at the 15-bed hospital, mostly handling routine emergencies, monitoring post-op patients, and occasional trauma from ATV or logging accidents. The work was manageable, the staff friendly. I was staying in hospital-provided housing, a small furnished apartment above a downtown business. Wallace felt safe, walkable, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. My shifts were usually quiet, predictable. The hospital was tucked into the mountains of northern Idaho, serving the remnants of what had once been a thriving silver mining region. Most of the mines had closed decades ago, but the town held on. Population maybe 800. The kind of place where families went back generations, and outsiders like me were noticed. My first 2 weeks went smoothly. I'd work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., handled the occasional emergency, mostly elderly patients with heart issues, or construction workers with broken bones. Nothing unusual for a small rural hospital. The attending physician was named Dr. Hayes, probably in his late 50s, had been working in Wallace for over 20 years. The other nurses were locals, daughters and granddaughters of miners. They knew everyone who came through the doors. During my 3rd week on nights, everything changed. It was around 1 a.m. on a Tuesday when the ambulance brought him in. A man in his early 30s, hypothermic, covered in mud and blood, barely conscious. The paramedics said they'd found him on the side of a logging road about 15 miles outside town near some old silver mining claims. I started triage immediately. His vitals were concerning, body temperature dangerously low, multiple lacerations. But what caught my attention were his injuries. They didn't match the story. He had defensive wounds on his hands, deep cuts like he'd been trying to protect himself, marks on his wrists consistent with restraints, zip ties or rope, lacerations on his arms and chest that looked deliberate, not from a fall or accident. As I was cutting away his clothes to assess the damage, he started mumbling, incoherent at first, then clearer. He kept repeating, "Found the wrong mine," They wouldn't let me leave, had to run. His eyes were wild, terrified. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength and whispered, "Don't let them take me back." I asked, "Who? Who was he afraid of?" But before he could answer, Dr. Hayes came in, took one look at the patient, and his expression changed. Something flashed across his face. Recognition, maybe, or concern. He told me to start warming protocols and prep for possible surgery. Then he left the room to make a phone call. I worked on stabilizing the patient, started an IV, warming blankets, monitored his vitals. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Every time he woke, he'd start talking about the mine, about finding something he wasn't supposed to see, about people chasing him through the forest. Maybe 30 minutes later, 2 men walked into the ER. They weren't hospital staff. They were wearing work clothes, jeans, heavy boots, flannel jackets covered in dirt. One of them was older, maybe 50, with a gray beard and cold eyes. The other was younger, muscular, with a scar running down his left cheek. They walked straight to the patient's room like they owned the place. The older one told me they were his co-workers from a mining reclamation company, said there'd been an ATV accident on their property. They were here to take him home. I explained that he wasn't stable, that his injuries needed further assessment, that he'd been talking about being chased, that this didn't look like an ATV accident. The younger one stepped closer, invaded my space, told me I must be confused. Accidents in the mountains can look like a lot of things. People get disoriented. Hypothermia makes them say crazy stuff. I stood my ground, told them hospital policy required patient stabilization before discharge, especially with his condition. I said I needed to call the sheriff, document potential foul play. That's when Dr. Hayes came back. He pulled me aside, his hand firm on my elbow, guided me into the hallway. He told me the situation was under control, that he'd spoken with the patient's employer, that they'd sign him out against medical advice. I tried to argue, said this felt wrong, said the patient's injuries were suspicious. Dr. Hayes cut me off, his voice low and sharp, told me it was already handled, told me to finish my charting and move on. I watched helplessly as those 2 men took the patient. He was barely conscious, couldn't walk on his own. They had to support him between them. As they passed me, his eyes met mine, pleading, terrified. Then they were gone, out the ER doors and into a pickup truck idling in the parking lot. My shift ended at 7 a.m. I went home to my apartment, couldn't sleep, kept replaying everything in my head, the patient's injuries, his terror, the way Dr. Hayes had shut me down, the way those men had walked in like they'd done this before. When I came back for my shift that night, I pulled up the patient's file to check if he'd returned, if there'd been any follow-up. There was nothing, no record of his admission, no intake notes, no treatment documentation. I checked the ER log, checked the ambulance dispatch records, nothing. It was like he'd never existed. My intake notes, the ones I'd carefully documented with photos of his injuries, timestamps, vitals, all of it had been deleted from the system. I confronted Dr. Hayes in the break room, asked him what happened to the records. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, told me he didn't know what I was talking about, said we'd had a quiet night. No major traumas, I insisted, described the patient, the injuries, the 2 men. His expression hardened. He told me to drop it, told me I must be tired, confused, suggested I take a personal day. Over the next week, I started noticing things. The same 2 men from that night were around Wallace. I'd see them parked outside the hospital when I arrived for my shift, watching. I'd see them at the grocery store, always a few aisles away, always watching. I'd see them outside my apartment building, sitting in their truck, engine running. Another nurse, an older woman named Margaret who'd worked at the hospital for 15 years, pulled me aside in the break room. She spoke quietly, barely above a whisper, told me to let it go. Said some things in old mining towns stay buried for good reasons. Said I was young, had my whole career ahead of me, didn't need to make enemies here. I asked her what she meant. She just shook her head, told me Wallace wasn't like other places, Said the mines might be closed, but the mountain still had secrets. People still made money in ways they didn't talk about. She wouldn't say more, just squeezed my hand and walked away. I started researching. Spent my days off searching online for information about the mining area where the patient had been found. I found articles about illegal precious metal mining operations in northern Idaho, small-scale operations run by local crews who'd extract silver and gold from old claims without proper permits or environmental oversight. I found a missing person case from 3 months earlier. A geology student from Boise who'd been hiking in the same area, never found. Then my apartment was broken into. I came home from a shift around 8 a.m. The door was still locked, but I knew immediately something was wrong. My laptop was open on the kitchen table. I'd left it closed. My nursing files, the personal copies I kept of patient records, had been accessed. Pages left open. Someone had gone through everything. They didn't take anything. Not my laptop, not my phone, not my wallet. They just wanted me to know they'd been there, that they could get to me. But the worst part wasn't what they were hiding in those mountains. It was realizing how many people in Wallace knew, and how long they'd been staying silent. The next night at work, Dr. Hayes took me aside. His tone was different, softer but somehow more threatening. He told me he understood I was concerned, that I had questions, but involving outside authorities would be complicated. He said, my contract could be terminated for violating patient confidentiality. Even though there was no patient record to protect, he said my nursing license could be reviewed if complaints were filed about my professionalism. He implied that the entire town, including local law enforcement, wouldn't support my version of events. He made it clear, stay quiet or face consequences. I realized then that I was completely alone. The hospital administration knew. The local police knew. Probably half the town knew about whatever was happening in those mountains, and they'd all decided it was worth protecting. I completed my 3-month contract, counted down the days. During those final weeks, I kept my head down, worked my shifts, didn't ask questions, didn't make waves. The 2 men stopped appearing everywhere I went. The surveillance ended once they were sure I'd gotten the message. On my last day, Margaret hugged me goodbye, whispered in my ear, "You did the right thing by leaving," which confirmed everything I'd suspected. Multiple offers came to renew my contract. The pay kept increasing. First a 10% raise, then 15, then 20. They really wanted me to stay, which told me how hard it must be to keep nurses in Wallace once they figure out what's really happening. I never filed a formal report. I had no physical evidence, no patient records, no proof that anything had happened. Anything I said would be my word against an entire town, and I had no doubt they'd protect their own. I feared retaliation against my nursing license, feared complaints would be filed claiming I'd fabricated patient records, violated ethics, something that would follow me forever. 8 months later, I saw a news article, brief mention of a multi-agency federal investigation into illegal rare earth mining operations in Shoshone County. The article mentioned concerns about labor practices, environmental violations, possible human trafficking. No charges were ever filed, no arrests made. The investigation seemed to disappear. I wonder about that patient constantly, whether he survived, whether he's still in those mountains, whether he ever escaped. I wonder about the geology student who went missing, whether his disappearance was connected. I carry enormous guilt about not speaking up, about choosing my career over doing what was right. But I also know I made the only choice available to someone with no power, no protection, no evidence. Speaking up would have destroyed me and changed nothing. The system in Wallace was too entrenched, too many people benefiting, too many people complicit. I now refuse contracts in isolated small towns. I research every hospital before I apply. Check ownership. Check local politics. Check if there have been complaints or investigations. I won't work anywhere that feels too insular, too closed off, too protective of local secrets. Sometimes I think about calling federal authorities, about telling them what I saw that night, But what would I say? I treated a patient who doesn't exist, whose records were deleted, who was taken by men I can't identify, to a location I don't know, 8 months ago, in a town where everyone would deny it happened. I still have nightmares about his eyes, the way he looked at me as they took him away, pleading, knowing I couldn't help him, knowing nobody would. Wallace is still there, still tucked into those mountains, still protecting its secrets. And somewhere in the forest outside town, there are mines where things happen that nobody talks about, where people disappear, where the mountain keeps its secrets buried. And I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have saved him, if I'd been braver, if I'd pushed harder, if I'd been willing to sacrifice my career. But I know the truth. Nothing I could have done would have changed what happened that night. The system was too strong, too protected, and I was just one traveling nurse passing through. They let me leave because I learned to stay silent, and silence is the price of survival in places like Wallace. My name is Noah. I'm 31, and last summer I inherited my grandfather's 10-acre property just outside Packwood when he passed away. I'd visited as a kid but hadn't been back in over 15 years. I took a month off work to clear out the old cabin, handle the estate, and prepare the property for sale. The property was beautiful but neglected. Overgrown trails, a cabin that needed serious repairs, decades of my grandfather's belongings to sort through. Packwood is tiny, population maybe 300, quiet, surrounded by forest, tucked between Mount Rainier and the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. The neighboring properties were spread far apart, some separated by acres of dense woods. I was staying in the cabin, working on clearing brush and organizing estate paperwork. I enjoyed the solitude and physical work, the break from my office job in Seattle. It felt like connecting with family history. My grandfather had bought this land in the 1970s, built the cabin himself, lived here until his health declined, and he moved to assisted living. I had good memories of summers spent here as a child, fishing in the creek, exploring the woods, listening to his stories. The first week I focused on the cabin interior, sorting through boxes of old photographs, tools, camping equipment, paperwork, from 50 years of owning the property. My grandfather had kept everything, receipts, tax documents, handwritten journals about the land. It was overwhelming but also touching, seeing his life documented in these small details. The second week I started working on the exterior, clearing brush along the property boundaries, repairing the porch, fixing the shed roof. The work was hard but satisfying. I was making real progress, starting to see the property's potential, thinking about what price I could ask when I listed it. While clearing brush along the back property line one afternoon, I discovered something strange. A trail cutting directly across my land, well-maintained, recent use, clearly not made by wildlife. The path was worn smooth, wide enough for people walking single file. Branches had been cut back to create clearance. Someone was using my property regularly. I followed the trail, curious about where it led. It ran from the main road about half a mile to my east, cut straight across the back corner of my property, then continued onto my neighbor's land to the west. Through the trees, I could partially see a large windowless metal building on the neighbor's property, maybe 40 feet long, industrial-looking, out of place in these woods. I never met the neighbor. My grandfather had never mentioned anyone living back there. The building looked relatively new, constructed within the last 10 years, maybe. There were no visible windows, just metal siding and a large rolling door like a warehouse entrance. I decided to walk the perimeter of my property more carefully, looking for other signs of activity. That's when I found them. Small cameras mounted in trees along the property. Line, disguised but visible if you knew what to look for. They were professional quality. Solar-powered, weatherproof. Definitely not my grandfather's. I counted 4 cameras total, all positioned to monitor the trail, to record anyone approaching or using the path. I felt a chill run through me. Someone had set up surveillance on my land without permission. Someone was watching. 2 days later, the neighbor showed up. I was on the porch having coffee when a truck pulled up my driveway. A man got out, maybe 50 years old, wearing work clothes and a friendly smile. He introduced himself as Dale, said he owned the property to the west, had known my grandfather for years, wanted to offer his condolences. We talked for a few minutes. He was overly friendly, asking detailed questions about my plans for the property, whether I was planning to keep it or sell, how long I'd be staying. I mentioned casually that I'd found a trail running across the back of the land, asked if he knew anything about it. His expression changed, subtle but noticeable. The friendly smile stayed, but his eyes went cold. He said the trail had been there for years, with my grandfather's permission, just a convenience for accessing the Forest Service roads. He hoped I'd respect the arrangement. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Your grandfather understood certain arrangements, and I'm hoping you're reasonable like he was. The way he said it wasn't friendly. It was a statement of expectation, almost a threat. Before I could respond, he pulled out an envelope from his truck, handed it to me, said he'd like to make an offer on the property. A cash offer, quick closing, no hassle. He named a figure that was significantly below market value. I told him I hadn't decided about selling yet, needed time to think. He nodded slowly, told me to take my time but not too much time, said he'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings between neighbors. Then he drove away, left me standing there holding his envelope. That night, around 11 p.m., I heard vehicles. I was in bed reading when I heard engines, multiple vehicles, moving slowly. I got up and looked out the window, saw nothing from the front of the cabin, grabbed a flashlight, and went out the back door. Through the trees, I could see lights, flashlight beams moving along that trail. I counted at least 6 people, maybe more, all walking toward Dale's building. I heard voices, low conversation, the sound of the metal door rolling open, then closing. The lights disappeared inside. I stood there in the dark for maybe 20 minutes, watching. Eventually, the door opened again. The people came back out, walked back along the trail toward the main road. I heard trucks starting up in the distance, then silence. The next morning, I drove to the Packwood General Store for supplies. While I was checking out, an older woman in line behind me spoke up, asked if I was staying in my grandfather's cabin. I said yes. She looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "Some deals don't end just because someone dies." She didn't explain, just paid for her items and left. But I wasn't prepared to learn what my grandfather had been part of for over 20 years, or that the entire town expected me to continue his arrangement. I went back to the cabin and started going through my grandfather's financial records more carefully, specifically looking for anything related to Dale or the property. I found them in a fireproof box under his bed, bank deposit slips going back over 20 years, regular deposits of $500 every month, documented as property easement in my grandfather's neat handwriting, $500 a month for 20 years. That was $120,000 my grandfather had taken from Dale. For what? For allowing access across his land, for looking the other way, for staying quiet about whatever was happening in that metal building. I felt sick, angry, betrayed. My grandfather, who I'd admired, who taught me about honesty and integrity, had been taking money for decades, had been complicit in something he knew was wrong. I decided to drive to Randall, the next town over, about 20 miles west, to get away from the property, clear my head, think about what to do. I was gone maybe 3 hours. When I came back, I knew immediately someone had been inside the cabin. My grandfather's papers were disturbed, not obviously, but I'd been organizing them carefully. Certain stacks were moved, certain boxes opened. Whoever had been inside had been looking for something specific. The financial records, maybe. Evidence of the arrangement. Some documents were missing. The most recent bank deposit slips. Some of my grandfather's journals. Anything that might have contained details about Dale or what was happening on the neighboring property. I realized then that I was in danger. Not immediate physical danger, maybe, but I was trapped in something that had been in place long before I inherited this property. Dale expected me to continue my grandfather's arrangement, expected me to stay quiet, expected me to take his money and look the other way. And if I didn't, what would happen? Would I have an accident on these remote mountain roads? Would the cabin burn down with me inside? Would I simply disappear, like people sometimes do in areas like this? I spent 3 days barely sleeping, trying to decide what to do. I could go to the police, but with what evidence? Some cameras on my property, a trail through the woods, regular cash payments that could be explained as a legitimate easement. I had no proof of anything illegal. I could refuse Dale's offer, insist on keeping the property, but then what? Live in fear, wonder every time I heard a noise at night, constantly look over my shoulder. I didn't want this land, didn't want this legacy. Dale came back. I saw his truck coming up the driveway, and my heart started pounding. He got out, same friendly smile, asked if I'd thought about his offer. I told him I'd decided to sell, that I'd accept his price. He looked relieved, actually relieved, shook my hand, said I was making the smart choice, said my grandfather would be proud that I was being reasonable. We agreed on a closing date 2 weeks out, all cash. He'd handle all the paperwork. I spent those 2 weeks finishing up the cabin, packing my grandfather's belongings, trying not to think about what I was doing. I was selling out, taking the easy path, letting Dale continue whatever operation he was running back there. At the closing, Dale showed up with a lawyer and a briefcase full of cash. We signed the papers. I handed over the deed. He handed me the money. It was done. The property was his. I was free. My cousins were furious when they found out, called me, demanded to know why I'd sold so far below market value. I couldn't explain, couldn't tell them what I'd found, couldn't admit that our grandfather had been taking money from Dale for decades. I just said I wanted to be done with it, that I needed the quick sale. My relationship with that side of the family became strained. They thought I'd cheated them out of their inheritance, didn't understand that I'd been trying to protect them from something worse. I never reported what I suspected. I had no hard evidence, no proof of any crime, just suspicions and circumstantial details. And honestly, I was afraid of what Dale might do if I brought attention to his operation, afraid of what investigating might reveal about my grandfather's involvement. I still don't know what was in that metal building, what Dale was doing back there, why he needed secret access across my grandfather's land, why he was willing to pay $500 a month for over 20 years to maintain that access. I don't know if my grandfather took that money out of fear or greed, whether Dale approached him with an offer or a threat, whether my grandfather knew exactly what was happening or chose to remain ignorant. I think about it constantly. Wonder if I should have been braver, should have gone to federal authorities, should have documented everything and taken my chances. But I also know that I made the only choice I could make at the time. I sold the property for $95,000 when it was probably worth $200,000. I took a massive financial loss just to escape. My cousins think I'm an idiot. My aunt won't speak to me. They don't know that I potentially saved us all from becoming entangled in whatever criminal enterprise Dale was running. Sometimes I search online for news about Packwood, about criminal investigations in that area, about federal raids or arrests. I've never found anything. Whatever Dale is doing, he's still doing it, still operating with impunity. And somewhere in those mountains outside Packwood, there's a trail that runs across the property I used to own, leading to a windowless metal building where things happen that require secrecy, require isolation, require corrupt arrangements with neighbors who agree to look the other way. My grandfather was one of those neighbors for over 20 years. He took the money, he stayed quiet, he was complicit. And when he died, Dale expected me to take his place, to continue the family tradition of silence and cooperation. I refused. I sold out and walked away. I chose my safety over the truth, and I have to live with that choice, with the knowledge that whatever Dale is doing continues, because I didn't have the courage to stop it. I still have nightmares about that metal building, about what's inside, about what my grandfather saw or knew, about what would have happened if I'd refused Dale's offer, if I'd tried to fight, if I'd gone to the authorities. I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe some legacies are better left buried, some family secrets better left unexplored. Maybe I made the right choice by walking away. But I don't believe that. I believe I failed. I believe I took the coward's way out. I believe that somewhere in those Packwood mountains, terrible things continue to happen, because people like me, like my grandfather, chose silence over courage. And that guilt is the real inheritance I received last summer, the weight of knowing and choosing to do nothing. And that's a burden I'll carry for the rest of my life. My name is Indigo, and when I joined that search party in Troy, I thought I was helping find a missing hiker. I didn't realize I was part of making sure certain things stayed hidden. I'm 29, and last October I spent a week in Troy visiting my college roommate Sarah, who'd moved there 2 years earlier after getting married to a local guy. It was supposed to be a relaxing mountain getaway. Hiking, catching up, small-town charm. The kind of trip we'd been planning since she left Seattle. Troy is tiny, population around 800, nestled in the Cabinet Mountains near the Idaho border. Beautiful in that rugged Montana way, surrounded by wilderness. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody and outsiders are noticed. Sarah and her husband Jake seemed happy. They'd bought a small house on the edge of town, integrated into the community. Jake worked at the lumber mill. Sarah taught at the elementary school. I spent my days hiking nearby trails. The Cabinet Mountains wilderness was stunning. Dense forest, sharp peaks. Trails that went for miles without seeing another person. Evenings I'd spend at their house cooking dinner and reminiscing about college, catching up on 2 years of separation. It felt good, normal, exactly what I needed. It was my last full day when everything changed. We were having breakfast when Sarah got a text from a neighbor. A solo hiker from California was missing in the Cabinet Mountains wilderness. Last seen 2 days earlier on the Ross Creek Trail. Hadn't returned to his campsite. His rental car was still at the trailhead. Local search and rescue was organizing search parties. Jake immediately said he was volunteering. He'd grown up hiking these mountains, knew the terrain. I decided to join. I'm an experienced hiker, have wilderness first aid training, figured I could help. Sarah seemed hesitant. Told me I didn't have to, that I was on vacation, but I insisted. Told her it was important, that someone needed help. About 40 people gathered at the ranger station the next morning, mostly locals, a few tourists like me who wanted to help. The search coordinator was a man named Tom, maybe 60, retired Forest Service. He'd been running search and rescue operations in these mountains for 30 years. He divided us into groups, assigned each group a specific trail sector, gave us maps, radios, basic instructions. My group had 6 people, Jake, myself, 2 other local men I didn't know, and a couple from Seattle who'd been camping nearby. We were assigned the eastern sector of the Ross Creek area, about 5 miles of trail and surrounding forest. Tom told us to stay in communication, mark any evidence we found, don't contaminate potential scenes. We started hiking around 8 a.m. The morning was cold, frost still on the ground. Our group spread out in a line, maybe 20 yards between each person, moving slowly through the forest, calling the hiker's name, looking for any signs, clothing, equipment, disturbance in the undergrowth. Around noon, we found something. I was on the left edge of our search line when I saw it. The missing hiker's backpack, lying next to a large boulder, maybe 30 yards off the trail. I called out to the group. Everyone converged on my location. The backpack was there, along with a water bottle, a camping stove, a sleeping bag, all scattered around the boulder. But something felt wrong about it. The items weren't dropped or lost in a panic. They were placed, deliberately arranged, like someone had set up a scene. I pointed this out to Jake. mentioned that the spacing looked intentional, that the backpack was unzipped but nothing had spilled out. He looked at me strangely, told me I was overthinking it, that people panic when they're lost, do irrational things. One of the other local men, a guy named Cole, radioed Tom to report what we'd found. Tom told us to mark the location, take photos, continue searching the immediate area. I took several photos on my phone, the backpack, the surrounding area, the way the items were positioned. As the day progressed, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Our search patterns seemed disorganized. We'd covered the same areas multiple times while large sections were completely ignored. I'd suggest searching to the north, and Jake would redirect us south. I'd point out areas that looked promising, and Cole would insist they'd already been searched. I also noticed that some of the search volunteers weren't actually searching. They were positioned at specific trail junctions, standing there like guards. When other groups approached, they'd redirect them, tell them those areas had already been covered, steer them away. At one point, I wandered slightly off our assigned sector, following what looked like a promising lead, a piece of fabric caught on a branch. When I examined it, I realized it was torn from a jacket. Recent. The edges were clean, not weathered. I radioed Jake to tell him what I'd found. He seemed annoyed, told me I was in an area that had already been thoroughly searched, that I needed to stay with the group. But I knew that wasn't true. There were no signs anyone had been through there, no footprints, no disturbed vegetation. The fabric was fresh evidence in an area that had been deliberately avoided. I heard two volunteers talking. They didn't know I was close enough to hear. One of them said something about keeping people away from the North Ridge area. The other agreed, mentioned that Tom knows what he's doing. Their tone wasn't about search efficiency. It was about containment, about control. Late that afternoon, around 4 p.m., Tom radioed all groups. They'd found the hiker's body. Recovery location was being secured. All search parties were to return to the ranger station. When we got back, Tom gave us a brief update. The hiker had been found at the base of a cliff on the North Ridge. Appeared to be an accidental fall. Body would be recovered by specialized team. Search was over. People seemed relieved, nodding, saying things like, "At least we found him," and "At least his family will have closure." But something felt wrong. I pulled out my map, looked at where Tom said the body was found. It was nowhere near the Ross Creek Trail where the hiker had told people he was going. It was miles away, in terrain that didn't make sense. I asked Jake about it, mentioned that the recovery location seemed strange. He got defensive, told me I didn't understand these mountains, that people get lost, wander off trail, end up in unexpected places. His tone was sharp, dismissive, not like him at all. That night at dinner, Sarah pulled me aside. Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. She told me to stop asking questions. Said it wasn't my business, that I didn't understand how things worked here. I was shocked. Asked her what she meant. She wouldn't explain, just said, "Please, for my sake, just let it go." I went to bed confused, disturbed, pulled out my phone to review the photos I'd taken during the search. Most of them were fine. Clear images of the backpack, the forest, the trail, but 3 photos wouldn't open. The files were corrupted. These were the photos I'd taken of the fabric I'd found, the photos of the area that had supposedly already been searched, the photos that might have proved something was wrong. The next morning, my last day in Troy, I walked to the general store to buy coffee. On my way back to Sarah's house, a sheriff's deputy stopped me. He was friendly, smiled, introduced himself as Deputy Harris, asked how I'd enjoyed my visit to Troy, said he'd heard I'd helped with the search party. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. His questions seemed casual, but they were pointed. He asked where I lived, what I did for work, how long I'd known Sarah, whether I planned to visit Troy again. Then he mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that mountain accidents happen, that outsiders sometimes don't understand local search protocols, that people can get the wrong impression. The way he said it wasn't threatening exactly, but it was a message, clear and direct. Stop asking questions, stop thinking too much about what you saw, accept the official story and move on. I flew home that afternoon. Sarah and Jake drove me to the airport in Kalispell. The drive was awkward, tense. We barely spoke when they dropped me off. Sarah hugged me, but it felt hollow, forced, like we were strangers performing a ritual. Over the following months, I tried to maintain our friendship, sent texts, made calls, suggested visits. But Sarah was always distant, evasive. Our conversations became shorter, less frequent. Eventually, we stopped talking altogether. I'd lost my best friend, and I didn't fully understand why. 4 months after I left Troy, I saw an article online, just a brief piece in a Montana news website, about ongoing concerns with trail safety in the Cabinet Mountains, budget cuts to search and rescue, need for better signage, the missing hiker from California was never mentioned. The case wasn't discussed. It was like it had never happened. I tried searching for more information, anything about the hiker, about the investigation, about what really happened, but there was nothing. No follow-up articles, no family statements, no memorial fundraisers, just silence. I'll never know if it was a mishandled accident or something worse that the community deliberately concealed. I think about that hiker, about his last moments, about whether he fell or whether something else happened to him. I think about the way his belongings were staged, the way certain areas were deliberately avoided during the search, the way the recovery location made no sense. I think about his family, about what they were told, whether they believed the official story or whether they had questions nobody would answer, whether they're still looking for truth or whether they've accepted the closure they were given. I think about Sarah, about Jake, about Tom and Cole and Deputy Harris, about an entire town that seemed to move in coordination, protecting something, hiding something, and about how I was used, made part of their cover-up without even knowing it. The search party wasn't about finding the hiker. It was about controlling the narrative, about making sure the right people found the right evidence in the right places, about keeping volunteers away from areas where they might discover something that contradicted the official story. And I was part of it. I participated. I gave them legitimacy, my presence as an outsider, as a concerned volunteer, helped sell the story that this was a genuine search effort, not a staged performance. I carry guilt about that, about not pushing harder, not demanding answers, not going to federal authorities with my suspicions. But what would I have said? I found some equipment that seemed staged. Some photos on my phone got corrupted. Some areas of the forest weren't searched. A deputy gave me a friendly warning. None of that is evidence. None of that proves anything. I had no authority, no protection, no evidence, just suspicions and a growing sense that something terrible had happened, and everyone around me knew more than they were saying. I still have nightmares about it, about that hiker's backpack lying next to the boulder, positioned too perfectly, about the fabric caught on the branch in an area that had supposedly been searched, about the way Jake's expression changed when I asked questions, about Sarah's whispered plea to let it go. I wonder how many other incidents like this have happened in Troy, in the Cabinet Mountains, in small, isolated communities where locals protect their own and outsiders are kept at arm's length. How many accidents aren't really accidents? How many missing people stayed missing because the search was never meant to find them? I'll never go back to Troy. I'll never see Sarah again. I lost my best friend because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, asked questions I wasn't supposed to ask, and she chose her community over our friendship, chose silence over truth. And somewhere in those mountains, there are answers I'll never have, truth that will stay buried, secrets that an entire town decided were worth protecting at any cost. That hiker from California deserved better, deserved a real search, a real investigation, deserved people who cared more about finding truth than protecting whatever it was they were hiding. But he didn't get that. He got a staged recovery, a convenient explanation, and a community that closed ranks around a story that didn't make sense. and I got a lesson about powerlessness, about how easily truth can be buried when everyone agrees to the same lie, about how friendship and loyalty mean nothing when they conflict with deeper allegiances I'll never understand. That's what I learned in Troy. That's the real story of that search party. And that's the burden I carry, knowing and being unable to do anything about it. My name is James, I'm 34, and I'm an environmental compliance inspector for the state of Oregon. I conduct routine quarterly assessments of municipal water systems throughout the Columbia Gorge region. Cascade Locks was on my regular inspection rotation, small town, population around 1,200 hectares, outdated but functional water treatment facility. I'd inspected it a dozen times over 3 years without major issues. This particular inspection in March was supposed to be completely routine. Review maintenance logs, test equipment calibration, collect water samples, file my report. I knew the facility manager, a guy named Bill, who'd worked there for 15 years. We had a professional working relationship, cordial, efficient, never any problems. The inspection should have taken 2 days. Maximum day 1 for documentation review and sample collection. Day 2 for follow-up questions and report finalization. I was staying at a small motel in town, planning to finish and drive home by Thursday. I arrived at the water treatment facility Tuesday morning around 8 a.m. Bill met me at the entrance with coffee and a handshake. We went through the usual pleasantries. How's the family? How's the job? Small talk that made the inspection process more comfortable. Then we got to work. The facility was small, served the town and some surrounding areas. Groundwater source, basic filtration and chlorination, nothing complex. My job was to verify they were following state regulations, documenting maintenance properly, testing water quality at required intervals. It was straightforward compliance work. During my records review, I started noticing irregularities, contamination numbers in the water testing logs that didn't align with previous quarters, readings that showed gradually increasing levels of heavy metals, lead, arsenic, cadmium, but the pattern was inconsistent. Some months showed spikes. Then the next month would show normal levels, then spikes again. There were also obvious gaps in documentation, missing pages, entries that appeared to be backdated using different ink. I could tell because the ink color didn't match the rest of the page, and the handwriting looked rushed, forced, like someone had gone back and filled in blanks they should have completed months earlier. I questioned Bill about it, showed him the inconsistencies. He seemed nervous, apologized, said they'd been having equipment malfunctions with their testing apparatus, waiting on replacement parts from the state, bureaucracy being slow, you know how it is. He made it sound like a minor administrative issue, nothing concerning. I nodded, made notes, told him I'd need to collect my own water samples for independent lab analysis, standard procedure. When facility records are incomplete, Bill agreed, helped me collect samples from multiple points in the distribution system. I labeled them carefully, documented collection times and locations, sent them via courier to the state lab in Portland, the rest. Of Tuesday passed, normally, I reviewed equipment maintenance logs, inspected the treatment systems. Everything seemed functional if outdated. I told Bill I'd return Wednesday morning after the lab results came back. We shook hands. I went back to my motel. Wednesday morning, I got the lab results via email around 7 a.m. I was drinking coffee in my motel room when I opened the attachment. What I saw made my stomach drop. The water samples showed concerning levels of heavy metal contamination, not just slightly elevated, but levels that should have triggered immediate public notification and mandatory reporting to the EPA. This wasn't a minor equipment malfunction. This was a serious public health violation. I drove to the facility immediately, walked in expecting to find just Bill. Instead, I was met by Bill, the town administrator who I'd never seen at the facility before, and a lawyer I'd never met. They were waiting for me in the conference room, 3 against 1. The town administrator, a woman named Patricia, spoke first. told me they appreciated my diligence, that they'd been waiting for confirmation of what they'd already known, that the contamination was a known ongoing issue they'd been actively managing and properly reporting for over a year. Then the lawyer slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, historical water testing logs, reports to state agencies, communications with the EPA, all showing the contamination problem, documented going back 18 months, all properly reported, all within legal compliance procedures. But I'd never seen any of these documents. I'd inspected this facility 4 times over the past 18 months, reviewed their logs each time. There had been no mention of contamination issues, no reports to state agencies, no EPA communications. These documents were new, fabricated, created to cover up what I'd just discovered. I tried to stay calm, asked why I'd never seen these documents in my previous inspections. Patricia looked at me with something between pity and contempt, suggested that perhaps my previous inspections had been less thorough than they should have been, that perhaps I'd missed critical documentation, that perhaps my inspection practices had been inconsistent. The implication was clear. If these documents became the official record, I was retroactively liable for missing catastrophic violations on a dozen previous inspections. My career would be destroyed. I'd be the inspector who failed to catch a major public health crisis for over a year. But I didn't understand until that moment that I wasn't investigating a water contamination violation. I was being systematically framed for missing one. The lawyer then offered me a way out, a paid consulting position with the town. They needed help properly documenting the historical contamination issue, clarifying any misunderstandings in previous reports, making sure everything was in order for state review. He named a fee, $15,000 for 3 months of consulting work. All I had to do was sign an agreement and help them create a narrative that protected everyone. I declined. Told them I needed to file my official report based on my findings, that I had a legal obligation to report contamination at these levels. Patricia's expression hardened. She told me that would be unfortunate, that the town would be forced to file a formal complaint about my inspection practices, that my supervisor would receive documentation of my inconsistent and unprofessional conduct. I left the facility, drove back to my motel, sat in the parking lot trying to process what had just happened. I checked my email metadata carefully, looked at when I'd received the lab results, discovered that my preliminary lab results had been forwarded to the town administrator at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before I received them at 7 a.m. Someone had unauthorized access to my state communications. Someone had been reading my emails. Someone had given them advance warning. That afternoon, my supervisor called. His tone was cold, formal, told me the state had received a formal written complaint from Cascade Locks regarding my inspection practices, allegations of inconsistent documentation, failure to properly review facility records, unprofessional conduct. He asked me to explain. I told him everything, the irregularities I'd found, the fabricated documents, the contamination levels, the attempt to bribe me with a consulting position. He listened, then told me to file my official report, that the state would review everything and determine next steps. I spent 2 days writing the most detailed report of my career, documented every irregularity, every inconsistency, every suspicious detail, included photos, included the independent lab results, included my concerns about fabricated records and unauthorized access to state communications. I submitted it Friday afternoon, thought I'd done the right thing, thought the truth would matter. 2 weeks later, my supervisor called again, told me the state had reviewed my report and the town's documentation, that the state was accepting Cascade Locks' historical records as accurate, that my concerns about fabricated documents couldn't be proven, that my previous inspection reports showed no issues which contradicted my current claims. He told me I was being reassigned away from the Columbia Gorge region. effective immediately. New inspection territory in southern Oregon. It wasn't disciplinary, he said, just a reorganization, a better use of resources. But we both knew what it really was. I was being removed because I'd become a problem. I tried to investigate further on my own time, researched the contamination source, traced it back to a shuttered aluminum smelting plant from the 1970s that was never properly decommissioned. The plant had been abandoned for decades, toxic waste left in place, slowly leaching into the groundwater that fed Cascade Locks' water system. Proper cleanup would cost tens of millions of dollars, money the town didn't have, money they'd never be able to raise. So instead, they'd chosen to cover it up, to fabricate records showing they'd known about it and been managing it, to protect themselves from EPA enforcement. And they'd successfully made me the scapegoat, the incompetent inspector who'd missed the problem for over a year, whose sudden discovery of contamination was suspicious, whose reports were inconsistent and unreliable. 8 months later, I left my state position entirely, took a job with a private environmental consulting firm in Portland. Better pay, less politics, no more dealing with small-town corruption and municipal cover-ups. Through professional contacts, I later learned that Cascade Locks declared municipal bankruptcy 18 months after my inspection, citing insurmountable infrastructure costs and declining revenue. The bankruptcy allowed them to avoid EPA-mandated cleanup costs, allowed them to restructure debt, allowed them to escape accountability. The contamination issue was never publicly reported to residents, no public health warnings, no notification that their drinking water had been compromised for years. People continued drinking contaminated water, feeding it to their children, cooking with it, bathing in it, never knowing the truth. I think about those residents constantly, about the health impacts they're suffering, about the children who were exposed during critical developmental years, about the cover-up that protected town officials and poisoned an entire community. I carry enormous guilt about not pushing harder, about accepting my reassignment instead of going to federal authorities, about choosing my career over public health. But I also know the system was designed to protect itself, designed to punish whistleblowers, designed to make standing up for truth more costly than staying silent. My reports are still in state archives, documenting what I found, but they're buried, contradicted by fabricated town records, undermined by complaints about my competence, effectively neutralized. Somewhere in Cascade, Locks people are still drinking contaminated water, still being poisoned by decades-old industrial waste, still being lied to by officials who chose cover-up over cleanup. And I'm here in Portland, working a comfortable job, making good money, trying not to think about what I failed to stop, trying not to count the cost of my silence measured in poisoned children and preventable disease. I learned that official records can be manipulated when money and politics align, that truth matters less than power, that one inspector with integrity is no match for an entire system committed to protecting itself. That's what I discovered in Cascade Locks. That's the real story behind my routine inspection. And that's the burden I carry, knowing the truth and being powerless to make it matter. My name is Oliver. I'm 27 and I'm a firefighter from Seattle. Last summer, I was temporarily assigned to wildfire response in the Mythau Valley as part of a mutual aid agreement. Winthrop served as our base of operations for 3 weeks during an unusually severe fire season. The assignment was exhausting but straightforward. Cutting containment lines, structure protection, coordinating evacuations when necessary. Winthrop is a small tourist town, population around 400, with a strong community cooperation ethic during fire emergencies. The locals were used to fire season protocols, grateful for our presence. They'd bring us food, coffee, offered their support. My crew worked 14-hour days, slept at the incident base camp on the edge of town, collapsed into sleeping bags each night covered in soot and ash. The fire we were fighting had started from a lightning strike in the mountains east of town, had grown to over 3,000 acres within days. The combination of drought conditions, high winds, and dense forest made it aggressive, unpredictable. We'd gain ground during the day, then lose it overnight when the wind shifted. During a Level 3 evacuation order for properties along the Chouach River, I was assigned door-to-door notification duty. My job was to ensure everyone had left, document any refusals, make sure no one was left behind when the fire came through. It was critical work. Lives depended on thoroughness. I was working my way through the more remote properties, several miles out from town, gravel roads that turned to dirt, cabins set back in the trees where people valued their privacy and isolation. Most properties were already empty. Residents had evacuated when the Level 2 warning went out. Smart people who understood the danger. At one property, just a cabin and a few outbuildings, I found an elderly man who refused to evacuate. He was sitting on his porch with a rifle across his lap, told me he'd lived through fires before, wasn't leaving his property to burn. This happens sometimes. People who refuse to leave, who value their land more than their safety. Standard procedure is to document the refusal. Have them sign a waiver acknowledging they're staying against official orders, explaining the risks, then you leave. You can't force people to evacuate. You can only inform and document. I got him to sign the waiver, made sure he understood the severity, that emergency services wouldn't be able to reach him once the fire came through. He nodded, said he understood, seemed coherent, capable of making his own decisions. But protocol also required me to walk the property perimeter, check for other residents or hazards, make sure there weren't children or disabled people being kept there against their will, make sure there weren't propane tanks or fuel storage that could create additional dangers. I started walking the property line, checking the outbuildings, a shed, a garage. Everything seemed normal. Then I found something that made me stop. Behind the garage, partially hidden by overgrown brush, was what appeared to be a second living structure, not a cabin, more like a large, modified storage container, the kind used for shipping, converted into living space. The door was unlocked. I opened it and immediately knew people had been living there recently. There were several sleeping bags laid out, maybe 5 or 6, food containers, empty water jugs, clothing for different sizes of people, men's work boots, women's shoes, children's clothes, a makeshift bathroom area with a bucket and privacy screen. But no one was there. The space was empty, abandoned. Recent, though. The food containers still had remnants. The sleeping bags were arranged like people had been using them regularly. This wasn't old. This was within the last day or two. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't right. The elderly man had signed a waiver for himself. But there had been other people here, multiple people, including possibly children, and they weren't in the system. They weren't documented. They weren't evacuated. I radioed my supervisor immediately, explained what I'd found, described the living structure, the evidence of multiple occupants, requested guidance on how to proceed, whether to search the surrounding area, whether to try to locate these people. His response shocked me. He told me to clear the property immediately and return to base, told me the location was already marked as evacuated in the system, told me not to document what I'd found. His tone was sharp, final, not the supportive guidance I was used to. I tried to argue, explained that there might be children involved, that we had a duty to locate these people and ensure their safety. He cut me off, told me to follow orders and return to base immediately. I drove back to base camp, confused, disturbed. When I arrived, my supervisor pulled me aside, away from the rest of the crew, told me the property was part of an ongoing federal investigation, that I needed to forget what I saw and not document it in my evacuation report. I asked what kind of investigation, why undocumented people living in a fire zone weren't being evacuated. He told me it was above his clearance, above mine, that federal authorities had specifically requested that property not be interfered with, that my job was to follow orders, but I knew evacuation protocols, knew that nothing superseded life safety. No investigation was worth leaving people to burn. I pressed harder, asked if someone had confirmed these people were safe, if someone had evacuated them through another channel. My supervisor's expression hardened, told me I was putting my career at risk by asking questions, that I needed to let it go, that sometimes in emergency services we encounter situations we don't fully understand, and our job is to trust the chain of command. I couldn't let it go. That night back at my motel, I researched the property through public records, used the address I documented, found a complicated ownership history involving bankruptcy fraud and out-of-state LLCs, shell companies registered in Nevada and Delaware, the kind of structure designed to hide real ownership. The next day, I cautiously asked a local Winthrop firefighter about the property. Older guy who'd been fighting fires in these mountains for 20 years. His response was immediate and uncomfortable. He told me, "Some things aren't our business," then walked away, wouldn't make eye contact. 2 days later, I saw the elderly property owner in town. I was getting supplies at the hardware store when I saw him, and I realized immediately he wasn't elderly. He was maybe 55, fit, alert, clean-shaven, nothing like the disheveled old man I'd met on the porch. He'd been playing a role, creating an impression of harmlessness, of someone who just wanted to be left alone. When he saw me watching him, recognition flashed across his face. Then he quickly left the store, got into a new pickup truck, and drove away. That night, the fire changed direction. Wind shifted unexpectedly around 2 a.m. Flames that had been moving west suddenly swung northeast, directly toward the properties along the Chooch River, including that property. I was manning the command center when the calls came in, updating maps, coordinating crews. I watched as our incident commander reviewed which properties needed immediate response. I saw that property come up on the screen, marked as already evacuated and cleared, no action required. I spoke up, told the commander I'd been there, that there might be additional occupants, that we should send someone back to verify. He looked at my supervisor. My supervisor shook his head slightly, told the commander the property was clear, federal investigation, leave it alone. But by then I'd realized that some evacuation orders aren't about saving people. They're about making sure no one asks questions about who wasn't actually there. I watched the fire move through that area, watched the real-time satellite imagery as flames consumed the forest where that property sat. Wondered if those people had gotten out, if they'd been warned through some other channel, or if they'd been left behind deliberately. When my 3-week assignment ended, I drove past the property on my way out of town. I had to see, had to know. What I found made my blood run cold. The main cabin had fire damage but was still standing. The elderly man's truck was gone. But behind the garage, where the converted shipping container had been, there was nothing but scorched earth and twisted metal. The structure had burned completely, destroyed, and there were no official reports of casualties, no injuries, no investigation. It was like those people had never existed. I completed my assignment and returned to Seattle, but I couldn't let it go. 2 weeks later, I filed an anonymous tip with federal authorities, included the property address, described what I'd observed, the hidden living structure, the evidence of multiple occupants, including children, the suspicious ownership records. I never received any follow-up, no confirmation it was investigated, no acknowledgement the tip was even received. The experience fundamentally changed how I view emergency services. I'd always believed our job was clear: save lives, protect property, serve the public. But I learned that disasters can be used to conceal things, that fires can be convenient ways to destroy evidence, that evacuation orders can be manipulated to hide who was really there. I still struggle with wondering if anyone was hurt or killed when that fire swept through, whether they were ever really there, whether they'd been moved before the evacuation orders, or whether my silence made me complicit in something terrible. I've considered leaving firefighting entirely. The career I loved feels tainted now. Every evacuation I work, I wonder what I'm not seeing, who I'm being told to ignore, what investigations are running parallel to our life safety mission. My supervisor never mentioned the incident again, treated me normally, gave me good performance reviews. It was like it never happened, which somehow made it worse. The casual way everyone moved on, accepted it, stayed silent. I think about those sleeping bags, about the children's clothes, about people living in a shipping container in the mountains, about whether they were victims or criminals or both, about why federal authorities would rather let them burn than acknowledge their existence. I'll never know the answers. I filed my anonymous tip and got silence. I followed orders and swallowed my questions. I became complicit in whatever that property was hiding. And somewhere in the mountains outside Winthrop, there's scorched earth where people might have lived, where evidence might have been destroyed, where answers burned along with the forest. That's what I learned last summer, that emergency services can be used to hide crimes, that fires can destroy more than just trees, that sometimes the people we're trained to trust are protecting something other than public safety. And I have to live with that knowledge, have to show up for every shift, knowing that next time I might be ordered to look away again, might be told to ignore people in danger, might be made complicit in covering up something terrible. That's the burden I carry. That's the cost of understanding how disasters can be weaponized. And that's why I wake up some nights wondering if I'm still a firefighter or just another person protecting secrets I'll never understand. My name is Arilee, and I thought I was just servicing a cell tower in Darby. I didn't realize I'd discovered someone had been listening to the entire town for months. I'm 33, and I work as a cell tower maintenance technician for a regional telecommunications contractor. My job takes me to remote cell towers throughout Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming for routine maintenance, repairs, and equipment upgrades. I work alone most of the time, comfortable with isolation and heights. It's solitary work, but I prefer it that way. Just me, my tools, and the technical problems I'm trained to solve. Darby was one of my regular service locations, a small cell tower on a hillside serving the town, population around 700 hers, and the surrounding Bitterroot Valley. I'd serviced this specific tower 4 or 5 times over 2 years without any issues. It's a straightforward job. Climb the tower, run diagnostics, replace equipment as needed, update logs, move on to the next location. I usually stayed overnight at a small motel in Darby, completed the work the next morning. Efficient, routine, predictable. During this particular service visit in August, everything changed. I arrived at the tower site around 9 a.m., parked my truck at the base of the access road, grabbed my equipment bag, started my walk-around inspection like always, checking the fence, the equipment housing, the power supply, looking for obvious issues before I climbed. That's when I noticed the locks on the equipment housing showed signs of tampering. Subtle, but clear if you know what to look for. Scratch marks around the keyhole. The metal slightly bent like someone had used force or improper tools. Nothing appeared stolen or obviously damaged, but someone had definitely been inside. I documented it with photos, made a note in my log, then opened the housing to check the equipment. Everything looked normal at first. The power systems, the backup batteries, the main transmission equipment, all standard configuration. But when I started running my diagnostics, connecting my laptop to the system to check performance metrics, I found something that made my stomach drop. There was an unauthorized device physically spliced into the tower system, tucked behind the main equipment rack, deliberately hidden. It was sophisticated, homemade, circuit boards, and wiring that looked professional but not manufactured, clearly designed by someone with serious technical knowledge. I disconnected it carefully, examined it closer, realized what I was looking at. It was an interceptor, designed to capture and store all cellular traffic in the coverage area. Calls, text, data, everything passing through this tower was being copied to this device. Someone had been monitoring every phone conversation, every text message, every data transmission in Darby for who knows how long. I took extensive photos, documented the device's connection points, the way it was wired into the system. Then I called my regional supervisor immediately, told him what I'd found, described the device, explained that this was a serious breach, possibly illegal wiretapping, definitely unauthorized access to telecommunications infrastructure. His response shocked me. He told me to remove the device. Don't document it in the official maintenance log. Don't mention it in my report. Just dispose of it and move on. I tried to argue, explained that this was a federal crime, that we had an obligation to report it. He cut me off, told me this had happened before at rural towers, probably law enforcement related. Not my concern, just do my job and stay out of it. But I'd seen law enforcement intercept equipment before. During training, during consultations with federal agencies, this wasn't that. This was jury-rigged, too sophisticated for amateurs, but not official equipment. This was someone with technical knowledge conducting illegal surveillance. I told my supervisor I wasn't comfortable with this, that we needed to at least report it to our legal department. He got angry, told me I was making a problem where there wasn't one, told me to follow instructions or he'd find someone else who would. The threat was clear, comply or lose my job. I hung up, sat in my truck staring at the device I'd removed, trying to decide what to do. I kept it, wrapped it carefully, stored it in my equipment bag. If this became a legal issue later, I wanted evidence. That night at my motel, my phone started behaving strangely. I was trying to call my boyfriend in Missoula, and the call dropped 3 times. Mid-conversation, just cut off. Then my texts weren't going through. They'd show as sent on my end, but he wasn't receiving them. Then I started hearing weird clicking sounds on the line, rhythmic, electronic, like someone was listening. I realized then that someone was actively monitoring my phone communications in real time. They knew I'd found the device, knew I'd reported it, knew I still had it. They were demonstrating their capability, letting me know they could reach me whenever they wanted. I couldn't sleep. I researched the device type using my laptop on the motel's Wi-Fi, found similar homemade interception equipment described in articles about stalking cases and identity theft operations, found forum posts from other technicians who discovered similar devices on rural towers, always in small, isolated communities, always with the same response from management: remove it, don't document it, stay quiet. The next morning, I went to the coffee shop in Darby, needed caffeine, needed to think. I was sitting alone at a corner table when a man approached, maybe 40 years old, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. Nothing distinctive. He sat down across from me like we were friends. He knew my name, said airily, "Right." Not a question, a statement. He mentioned he'd heard I'd been working on the tower, hoped everything went smoothly, asked if I'd found everything in order. I'd never seen him before, never told anyone in town what I was doing, never mentioned my name to anyone. But he knew. He knew exactly who I was and why I was there. I tried to stay calm, told him the maintenance was routine, nothing unusual. He smiled, said that was good, that Darby appreciated having reliable cell service, that sometimes equipment malfunctions get resolved on their own. Then he left, walked out of the coffee shop, got into a truck parked across the street, and drove away. I went back to my motel room, packed immediately. I was planning to leave that day, 2 days ahead of schedule, but first I went to dinner at the diner on Main Street, trying to act normal, trying not to look panicked. When I returned to my room around 7 p.m., I knew immediately someone had been inside. My work laptop was on the desk. I'd left it in my bag. It was open, moved. My documentation files had been accessed. I could tell from the recent file history someone had gone through everything. My photos of the device, my maintenance logs, my notes. They didn't take anything, didn't damage anything, just wanted me to know they could get to me, that locked doors meant nothing, that I had no privacy, no safety. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. It said, "Some equipment is better left alone." Just that, nothing else. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds. Then it disappeared. When I checked my message history, it wasn't there. The text had been deleted remotely. Someone had sent me a message and then erased it from my phone. I left Darby the next morning at dawn, didn't check out properly, just threw my stuff in the truck and drove. I kept the interceptor device as evidence but never officially reported it beyond my initial call to my supervisor. I feared for my job, feared for my safety, feared what would happen if I pushed this. Over the following weeks, I researched Darby, looked for patterns, found that the town had an unusually high rate of identity theft cases reported over the previous 18 months. Credit card fraud, bank account breaches, people's personal information being stolen and sold. But no arrests, no resolution, no investigation that went anywhere. Someone in Darby, someone with serious technical knowledge and access, had been harvesting personal information from residents' cell communications for months, maybe years, intercepting banking passwords, credit card numbers, social security numbers, everything people transmitted over their phones. And when I found the device, when I threatened to expose the operation, they demonstrated exactly how much power they had. They monitored my communications. They entered my room. They sent me messages that disappeared. They showed me I was completely vulnerable. I requested reassignment away from Montana roots. Told my supervisor I needed a change, took a pay cut to avoid returning to that region. He didn't argue, didn't ask questions, just approved it. Which told me he'd known all along what I'd find, what I'd be told to ignore. I still have the device. It's in a locked box in my storage unit. Evidence I'll probably never use because I have no proof of who installed it, no proof of how long it was there, no proof of what they did with the intercepted data. I don't use my personal phone for sensitive conversations anymore. I cover my laptop camera with tape. I check my hotel rooms for signs of entry. I've become paranoid, hypervigilant, constantly looking over my shoulder. I wonder if I should have reported it to federal authorities, to the FBI, to someone who could actually investigate. But what would I say? I found a device on a tower. My supervisor told me to ignore it. Someone in Darby has technical knowledge and bad intentions. That's not evidence. That's speculation. I wonder how many other towers have similar devices. How many other small, isolated communities are being monitored. How many other technicians have been told to stay quiet, to look the other way, to pretend they didn't see what they saw. I wonder about the residents of Darby, about whether they know their communications are being intercepted, about whether the identity theft cases are connected, about whether anyone will ever stop whoever's doing this. And I wonder if I made the right choice by leaving, by staying silent, by choosing my safety over the truth. I tell myself I had no power, no protection, no evidence that would hold up in court. But I also know I was complicit. I saw a crime and walked away. That's what I learned in Darby, that surveillance technology can be weaponized in small towns where nobody's watching. The telecommunications infrastructure can be compromised by people with knowledge and access. That reporting crimes can be more dangerous than ignoring them. And somewhere in the Bitterroot Valley, there's a cell tower serving Darby. And I don't know if someone installed a new device after I removed the old one, if the operation continues, if more people are having their identities stolen, their privacy violated, their lives monitored. I'll never go back to find out. I'll never know what happened after I left. I made my choice, and I have to live with it. The choice to survive rather than fight, to protect myself rather than others. That's the burden I carry. That's the cost of discovering something I was supposed to ignore, and that's why I'll spend the rest of my career wondering what I'm not seeing, what devices are hidden in equipment housings I service, what crimes I'm being told to overlook, because Darby taught me that sometimes the most dangerous discoveries are the ones nobody wants you to make, and the most dangerous truth is the one everyone agrees to pretend doesn't exist, My name is Theodore. I'm 40, and I manage a small self-storage facility just outside Bonner's Ferry that my family has owned for 30 years. It's not glamorous work. I handle rentals, maintenance, deal with late payments, occasionally auction off abandoned units. Bonner's Ferry is quiet. Population around 2,500, right near the Canadian border, the kind of place where not much happens. The storage facility has about 60 units, usually 80% occupied, a mix of locals storing seasonal equipment, RVs, household overflow. I know most of my long-term renters by name, people who've been with us for years, reliable, predictable. The work is solitary, but I prefer it that way. I live in a small house on the property, handle everything myself. Most days I see no one. It's a simple, quiet life. Last spring everything changed. A man came in to rent units, wanted 3 large ones, the 10x really 20 size. He paid 6 months cash in advance, nearly $4,000 in $100 bills. Gave minimal information, just a name and phone number, no local address. I asked for identification like usual. He showed me a driver's license. I photocopied it, filed it with the rental agreement, everything by the book. This wasn't unusual for storage facilities. We don't ask many questions. People value privacy, especially near the Canadian border where folks come and go for various reasons: hunting, fishing, business. Sometimes people are just passing through and need temporary storage. Not my business to pry. But over the following weeks, I started noticing things. The man and different people would come at odd hours, midnight, 3 a.m., always when they thought I was asleep. I'd hear trucks, engines running, voices, activity in those units. They'd spend hours there. Truck backed up to the units, loading or unloading. I couldn't tell which. I started paying attention, started watching from my window when I heard them. Counted maybe 4 or 5 different people over 2 weeks. All men, all coming at night. All avoiding the security lights, moving quickly, efficiently, like they'd done this before, one night around 2 a.m. I heard them again, decided to approach. I grabbed a flashlight and walked over, claiming I'd received a security alarm alert from that section. Wanted to make sure everything was okay. The original renter was there with 2 other men. They had the units open, truck backed up. I could see equipment inside but couldn't make out details. The renter was immediately hostile, stepped toward me, told me he'd paid for privacy, that his rental agreement gave him 24-hour access, threatened to take his business elsewhere if I kept bothering him. I backed off, apologized, told him I just wanted to make sure there were no issues. He stared at me for a long moment, then told me to go back to my house. They'd be done soon. I left. Felt like I'd made a mistake approaching them. The units had padlocks, his own locks per our rental agreement. I couldn't access them without cutting the locks, which I couldn't do legally without cause. So I just watched, documented the late-night visits in my private log, tried to decide if I should be concerned. 2 weeks later, I smelled something terrible coming from that section of the facility. Chemical, sharp, acrid, made my eyes water when I got close, like ammonia mixed with something metallic. I knew that smell wasn't normal, knew it could be a health hazard, maybe a chemical spill, maybe something dead. I tried calling the renter. His phone was disconnected, number no longer in service. I tried twice more over 2 days, same result. I was stuck. I had units on my property emitting dangerous chemical smells, a renter I couldn't contact, and a legal gray area about accessing his units. I made the decision to open them, worried about health hazards, worried about liability if someone got sick from the fumes, worried about what might be decomposing inside. I cut the locks with bolt cutters, opened the first unit. What I saw made my stomach drop. Industrial equipment, large plastic containers, chemicals in unmarked containers, digital scales, protective gear, clear evidence of drug manufacturing, not meth lab residue. This was different, more sophisticated professional-grade equipment. Everything organized, methodical. This wasn't some amateur operation. I immediately called the sheriff, explained what I'd found, gave him the address, Told him I needed law enforcement here right away. He said he'd send someone. I waited outside the units. Didn't touch anything else. Just waited. Sheriff arrived 40 minutes later. Deputy with him. I expected them to be alarmed, to call for backup, to treat this as a major bust. Instead, the sheriff looked annoyed, walked through the units slowly, examining everything. Then came back to me with an expression I couldn't read. He told me I should have called first before opening the units, that I'd potentially compromised an ongoing investigation. I was confused, asked what investigation. He said he couldn't discuss it. Told me the units were part of something bigger, that I needed to leave them locked and not discuss what I saw with anyone. But when the sheriff arrived, I realized my biggest mistake wasn't opening those units. It was thinking the police would actually do something about what I'd found. I tried to argue, explained that I had a legal obligation to maintain a safe facility, that chemical storage required proper permits, that I could be liable if something exploded or leaked. He cut me off, told me this was federal, above his authority, that someone would contact me with instructions. He made me relock the units with new padlocks, told me to stay away from them, told me if I discussed this with anyone I could be charged with obstruction. Then he left, took the deputy with him, didn't secure the scene, didn't take evidence, didn't do anything that looked like proper law enforcement procedure. Over the next week, the renter and his associates came back. I watched from my window as they emptied the units completely, made multiple trips over 3 nights, removed everything, the equipment, the chemicals, the containers, left the units completely empty, cleaned, like they'd never been used. I called the sheriff to report this. He told me to let it happen, told me not to interfere, told me it was all part of the plan. I asked what plan. He wouldn't explain, just repeated that I needed to stay out of it. The morning after they finished emptying the units, I found an envelope slipped under my office door. Inside was $5,000 in cash and a note, handwritten, block letters. It said, "For the inconvenience and your discretion, no signature, no return address, just the cash and the note." I stared at it for an hour, trying to decide what to do. Returning it felt dangerous, like rejecting their terms. Keeping it felt like accepting a bribe, becoming complicit. I kept it, locked it in my safe, told myself I'd figure out what to do later. A month later, a different sheriff's deputy showed up, someone I'd never met before, young guy, maybe 30. He asked detailed questions about my rental records, about the units that had been rented, about my documentation practices. He suggested very casually that keeping incomplete records wasn't illegal in Idaho, that storage facilities weren't required to maintain detailed logs, that sometimes memory gets fuzzy about exactly who rented what and when. The implication was clear: forget what happened, destroy any documentation, act like those units were never rented. I told him I kept proper records per state regulations. He smiled, said that was fine, just wanted me to know I had options if I ever needed them. After he left, I went through my files, pulled everything related to those 3 units, the rental agreements, the photocopied ID, my log of late-night visits, the documentation of what I'd found. I made copies, hid them at my house, then kept the originals in my office like normal. I never learned what was being manufactured in those units. The sheriff said drugs, but it could have been anything. Precursor chemicals, synthetic drugs, designer pharmaceuticals, something that required sophisticated equipment and professional knowledge. I never learned who was protected, whether the investigation was real or just a cover story, whether the sheriff was complicit or compromised or just following orders from higher up, whether federal authorities were actually involved or if that was a lie to keep me quiet. The investigation I was told about was never mentioned again. No arrests were made, no news stories, no closure. It was like it never happened. I kept the $5,000. I'm not proud of it, but I was afraid returning it would draw more attention, would mark me as uncooperative, would make me a problem they needed to solve. The money felt like insurance, proof they'd paid me to stay quiet, evidence I could use if things went wrong. My trust in local law enforcement was completely destroyed. I realized the sheriff either was involved or turned a blind eye, that I couldn't count on them to protect me or enforce the law, that my safety depended on my silence. 6 months later, I sold the storage facility, took a significant loss. The property was worth maybe $400,000. I sold it for $280,000 just to get out, moved to Coeur d'Alene, started working at a hardware store, gave up the family business my father had built. My father had owned that facility for 30 years before I took over. I wonder now if he knew, if the same thing had happened during his tenure, if those units had been used before for illegal operations, if this was why the business had stayed profitable even during economic downturns. I wonder if my property was deliberately chosen because of its location near the Canadian border, perfect for smuggling, perfect for operations that needed to move product north or south quickly, perfect for people who valued proximity to an international crossing. I wonder if other storage facilities in the area are being used the same way. If this is a pattern, if law enforcement is complicit throughout the region, or just in Bonner's Ferry, I feel like I was paid to be an accessory, like that $5,000 made me part of their operation whether I wanted to be or not, like keeping the money and staying quiet made me guilty. But what choice did I have? Reporting to federal authorities could have gotten me killed. Refusing the money could have made me a target. Staying and fighting would have destroyed me financially and maybe physically. I made the only choice I could make. I took the money. I stayed quiet. I sold the property and left. My family doesn't understand why I sold. They're angry. I let go of the business. They think I gave up. They don't know what happened because I can't tell them. I can't risk drawing attention back to that incident. Can't risk whoever was involved deciding I've become a liability. Sometimes I search online for drug busts near the Canadian border, for storage facility raids, for investigations into smuggling operations. I've never found anything that matches what I saw. Somewhere in northern Idaho, maybe in Bonner's Ferry, or maybe somewhere else, there are storage facilities being used for manufacturing or smuggling. There are law enforcement officers who look the other way. There are people making money off illegal operations with total impunity. And there are facility owners like me who discovered something they shouldn't have, who were paid to forget, who carry guilt about their silence. That's what I learned last spring, that corruption in small towns near borders can be total, that law enforcement can't be trusted when enough money is involved, that discovering crimes can be more dangerous than ignoring them. I still have that $5,000. Haven't spent it. Can't bring myself to. It sits in an envelope in my closet. Blood money, conscience money, evidence of my complicity. And I still have the copies of the documentation hidden at my house, insurance in case they ever come for me, proof of what I found and what I was told to ignore. I don't know if I'll ever use them. Don't know if speaking up now would matter or just get me killed, but I keep them, just in case. Just in case someday I'm brave enough to try. But I know I probably won't be. I know I'll carry this guilt forever. I know I sold out for $5,000 and my safety, and I know that somewhere, whatever was being manufactured in those units is still being made, just somewhere else, by the same people, with the same protection. And that's the real cost of my silence. Not the money, not the lost business, but knowing that evil continues because people like me choose survival over courage. My name is Leilani. I'm 25, and last summer I worked as a highway flagger for a road construction company on Highway 14 near Stevenson in the Columbia River Gorge. It was temporary work, decent pay, straightforward. Hold a stop, slow sign, direct traffic through construction zones. Stay alert for 8-hour shifts. Our crew was repaving a 3-mile stretch of Highway 14, just west of Stevenson, a small town of about 1,500 people, beautiful location, right along the Columbia River, the gorge walls rising on both sides, tourists heading to waterfalls and hiking trails. The work was routine. I'd flag traffic. Trucks would pass, lay asphalt, repeat. My coworker Jason worked the opposite end of the construction zone. We'd communicate by radio, coordinating when to let traffic through, when to hold it. Most drivers were patient, some annoyed by delays, all normal highway work. The crew was decent, about 12 people total, paving crew, equipment operators, laborers. My supervisor was a guy named Rick, who'd been in construction for 20 years. The pay was $22 an hour, better than most flagging jobs. The company promised steady work through the summer if I wanted it. 3 weeks into the project, I started noticing a pattern. Certain vehicles would approach the construction zone, see me flagging, and immediately turn around rather than wait, not in a normal impatient way, but deliberately, specifically avoiding the construction zone entirely. Always the same type of vehicle, newer trucks with covered beds or cargo vans, usually out-of-state plates, Oregon, California, Idaho, always solo drivers, always men. I noticed because it was unusual. Most people would just wait the 5 or 10 minutes for traffic to clear. Turning around meant backtracking miles to find another route. At first, I thought they were just really impatient, but then I realized they'd turn around even when the wait was only 30 seconds, even when they could clearly see straight through the construction zone, see that traffic was already moving. They weren't avoiding a delay. They were avoiding me, avoiding being seen, avoiding passing through a controlled checkpoint where someone might notice them. One afternoon around 3 p.m., a black pickup with Oregon plates approached, newer model, covered bed with tie-down straps. The driver saw me standing there with my paddle. I saw his expression change, saw him start to slow down, like he was going to turn around. But traffic behind him had already stacked up. He was blocked. Couldn't turn around without causing a scene, so he had to wait. I watched him in those 3 minutes while I held traffic. He kept looking at his mirrors, checking behind him, visibly nervous, hands gripping the steering wheel too tight. When I finally waved him through, he accelerated hard, avoided eye contact completely, didn't acknowledge me at all. I mentioned the pattern to Jason on our radio, kept my voice casual, said I'd noticed some vehicles turning around before, entering the zone, asked if he'd seen the same thing at his end. His response was strange, immediate. He said, "Yeah, some drivers have been doing that. Don't worry about it." Then he changed the subject, talked about something else, shut down the conversation. But I was worried. This felt wrong. Felt like something more than just impatient drivers. I started paying closer attention, started taking photos of license plates when vehicles turned around, just out of curiosity, just documenting what I was seeing. I used my phone during breaks, zoomed in, got clear shots of maybe a dozen plates over 4 days. After 4 days of documenting this, my supervisor, Rick, pulled me aside during lunch break, told me to focus on my job, not on traffic patterns, told me to stop photographing vehicles, or I'd be removed from the site. His tone was serious, threatening, not the friendly supervisor I'd known for 3 weeks. I'd never told anyone except Jason about the photos, hadn't mentioned it to Rick, hadn't discussed it with anyone else on the crew, which meant Jason had reported me, meant someone was monitoring what I was doing, what I was noticing, meant my coworker had been instructed to watch me. I realized then that someone on the crew had been reporting my activities to the supervisor, that I was being monitored by my own coworkers, that whatever was happening here involved multiple people on the construction crew. That night, I researched Stevenson and Highway 14, looked at maps, read about the area, discovered that Highway 14's location makes it a key route for transporting goods between Portland and eastern Washington while avoiding Interstate 84's weigh stations and inspection points. It's a slower route, but completely avoids the commercial vehicle checkpoints, the state patrol presence, the infrastructure designed to catch illegal cargo. I started connecting pieces. Our construction zone created a natural choke point. All traffic had to slow down, had to pass a flagger, had to be visible for those few seconds, Vehicles that needed to avoid scrutiny would see the construction zone and turn around rather than risk being noticed. And to them, I represented a threat, an unexpected observer who might remember their vehicle, might document their license plate, but I didn't realize until then that our construction zone wasn't just repaving a highway. It was being used as a checkpoint for something I was never supposed to notice. The next day, a state trooper showed up, parked his patrol car near our construction zone, just sat there for his entire shift. Visible, obvious. I watched the traffic pattern that day. Not a single vehicle turned around. Everyone passed through normally, patiently, the usual mix of tourists and locals and commercial traffic. The vehicles that had been turning around knew when law enforcement was present, knew to act normal, knew to avoid drawing attention, which meant they had communication, coordination, advance warning. After our shift that day, Jason approached me, spoke quietly, told me, "Let it go, Leilani. This job ends in 2 weeks. Just let it go." He wouldn't elaborate, wouldn't explain what I should let go. Just that warning, that plea. 3 days later, my car was broken into. I'd parked in the construction crew parking area like always, supposedly secure. When I came back after my shift, the passenger window was smashed, glass everywhere. I called the police, filed a report. They took notes but seemed disinterested. Told me it was probably kids. Nothing valuable was stolen. My sunglasses were still there. My jacket, some cash in the center console, but my phone that I'd left in the car was gone. When I reported it stolen, the officer asked if I had it backed up. I said yes, to the cloud. He suggested I do a remote factory reset to protect my data. I did the reset that night from my laptop. The next day, I picked up a replacement phone. When I tried to restore from backup, I discovered that my photos from the past week were missing, corrupted, wouldn't download, including all the license plate photos I'd taken. Someone had accessed my cloud account, deleted specific files, left everything else intact. This wasn't random theft. This was targeted. Someone had broken into my car specifically to get my phone, to delete evidence I'd been collecting, to send a message that I was being watched. I finished the 2-week contract, showed up every day, did my job, didn't ask questions, didn't take photos, didn't mention anything to anyone. Rick offered me continued work, said the company had another project starting nearby. Good pay, steady hours. I declined, told him I had other commitments. I never reported what I suspected because I had no evidence after my phone was wiped, and I didn't know who to trust. Clearly, someone in the construction company was involved, possibly Rick, possibly others on the crew, possibly even local police, given how disinterested they'd been about my car break-in. Over the following months, I searched online for news about Highway 14, found articles about increased drug trafficking along the gorge, about cartels using secondary routes to avoid law enforcement, about interstate smuggling operations that adapted quickly to changing patrol patterns. I wondered if our construction zone had been deliberately positioned, if the 3-mile repaving project was chosen, because it created a perfect screening point. Vehicles approaching from either direction would see the construction zone from a distance, would have time to turn around naturally without raising suspicion. Flaggers, like me, provided legitimacy. We were normal highway workers doing normal construction flagging. Nobody would question why we were there, why we were watching traffic, why vehicles were slowing down. We were cover for something else, unwitting participants in an operation we didn't understand. I feel used, like my presence as a normal highway worker provided cover for something criminal, like I was positioned there deliberately to make the checkpoint look legitimate, to give vehicles a reason to slow down and be observed without raising questions about why. I refused to take any flagging jobs now, turned down multiple offers. The work paid well, but I can't do it again knowing that I might be used the same way, might be providing cover for illegal operations, might be putting myself in danger by noticing things I'm not supposed to see. Sometimes I think about those vehicles that turned around, about what they were transporting, about where they were going, about whether they found alternate routes, or just waited until our construction zone was gone. Sometimes I think about Jason, warning me to let it go, about whether he was trying to protect me or protect the operation, about whether he was involved willingly or just following orders like me. Sometimes I think about Rick pulling me aside, about how he knew I was taking photos when I'd only told Jason, about whether the entire crew was involved or just a few key people. And sometimes I think about that trooper showing up, about how the pattern stopped completely that day, about how they knew, about what that means for law enforcement involvement in the gorge. I carry guilt about staying quiet, about finishing my contract instead of walking away, about choosing my safety and my paycheck over doing what was right. But I also know I had no power, no evidence, no way to fight something that big. That's what I learned on Highway 14, that ordinary infrastructure can be weaponized, that construction zones can serve purposes beyond road repair, that everyday workers like me can be used as cover for criminal operations without even knowing it. And somewhere in the Columbia River Gorge, traffic still flows on Highway 14. And maybe there are new construction zones, new flaggers, new ordinary workers providing cover for operations they don't understand, being used the same way I was, and they don't know yet what they're really part of. If these stories kept you awake tonight, you're not alone. Here at Unspoken Fears, we bring you the darkest true stories from across America. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next terrifying upload. Drop a comment telling us which story disturbed you the most, and remember, the most frightening horrors are the ones that actually happened. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next nightmare.